different people across social impact investment. And so we've got Rahul from SASC, Surabhi, who's just been at Nesta Arts and Culture Impact Fund, and Victoria, who's at BSc. So they will each give their overview of actually their day jobs and actually some of their top tips and how they got into impact investment shortly. But what I'm going to do is just give you a really brief presentation of some things to think about. So if you just bear with me while I share my screen, hopefully this is going to work magically. It doesn't look as though it's about to, so bear with me. Do you know, when you always have these moments where you expect everything to work beautifully and it doesn't. Ruth and I just checked this and it worked fine, and now it's not, so we're good. Okay. So I'm just gonna do this. Okay, brilliant. So hopefully you can see my screen now. I'm optimistic that somebody's gonna give me the thumbs up. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Victoria. So thank you again for joining us. So what we're going to cover is just a bit of an introduction. I'm going to give you an overview of social impact investment. So to emphasize, this is not an introduction to social impact investment as a topic. It's really focused on careers. So I'm going to do a little bit of a rush through some of that overview piece before diving into that careers aspect, before we get to the panel discussion and the Q&A, which in my opinion is far the most interesting part of this. So my slides are not moving on. Can you see the next slide? I'm so sorry. This is not working very well. Yeah, we're good? Yeah. So what is social impact investment? So I'm really sorry. Can you see the slide that says what is social impact investment, or can you see the slide that says overview of social impact investment?
It's the overview slide.
Okay, no problem at all. This is not working as I wanted it to. We're just going to do it this way. I'm sorry that this is not working as I would hope it would do. So what is social impact investment? So there's lots of different definitions out there that are really trying to define what it means to do impactful investments. And so the two here that we highlight, which generally I find quite helpful, is the one from Good Finance. It's really about having repayable finance to help an organisation achieve social purpose. But also the global impact investment has got key characteristics that really determine what impact investment is, so that it's generating positive, measurable social impact alongside that financial return. But it can be tricky to really understand what that means in practice. And so I just wanted to give you an example of a social impact investment to really frame some of this. And so this is an example which will be quite close to what Rahul may talk about with SASC afterwards. But I wanted to talk about one of our programs which helps women who have been victims of domestic violence. And these women can be quite very vulnerable after a particular incident and need to be able to find safe accommodation for themselves and their family. Yet there's a real lack of that accommodation that's available and secure long-term housing. And there's an opportunity there for charities that are working with those vulnerable women and their children to be able to provide that safe accommodation as well as wraparound support. Yet there's often a lack of capital to be able to make that accommodation available, to build purpose-built homes for those people to be able to stay in. And so social impact investment has got the opportunity to be able to fund that sort of project where it's able to provide the finance to build the houses in the simplest way that enables that impact both for somebody to be able to live there, but also to be able to be repaid through rental income. That's a far simplified example, and I'm sure Rahul will do a far better job of describing it, but it's just really to give a sense as to actually what social impact investment can achieve. And the market's growing quite substantially, and it's grown phenomenally since the coin of impact investment was coined in 2007 by the Rockefeller Foundation. And really the UK has been a market leader since then. So we talk about the impact investment market globally, so 715 billion in 2020 according to the GIN. And really it's 58 billion in the UK according to the Impact Investment Institute in 2020. And from our own analysis at Big Society Capital, we believe that 6.4 billion is contributing towards deep, impactful solutions and what we describe as that social impact investment, where it's targeting vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. So you can see in that huge market, there's lots of job opportunities and it's growing, which makes it even more exciting. But I think what's really important to understand is that there's a spectrum of capital, and there's really a breadth of actually what impact means for different people individually, because it's all subjective in how we think about it. But there's various different frameworks and organisations that's tried to define actually what this broad spectrum of impact looks like. And this is what we've tried to show here. And I think this is really important as you think about what your type of career journey and what you want to focus on looks like. And so this top diagram is really just a bit of a simple spectrum that shows from all the way from finance first, it's traditional investment. It doesn't really take into account any impact considerations. And on the far extreme of this, maybe doing harm if it's investing in things like oil and gas or tobacco or all of those sin stocks that many people have heard of, all the way through to the other end, which is really philanthropy, which is the impact only. It's the grants, it's the ones that don't get repaid. And social impact investment and impact more generally sits in the middle of that, where it's trying to really harness that investment and the returns that are received, but also that impact and what is trying to be achieved as a result of the investment. And when we talk about social impact investment, it often sits in the middle. So it's not that it's seeking finance first with some considerations of impact, but it's not either impact first with only trying to have a little bit of financial return. But really, depending upon the nature of the investment, it will sit along that spectrum in social impact investment. And the impact management project, which some people may have come across, is a really good articulation of that spectrum, because it talks about, in the first instance, acting to avoid harm. And these are often ESG type investments, so the environmental, governance and social factors, where it's really trying to reduce the harm for people and the environment, but it's really not the driving force behind investments. And then we get onto the benefiting stakeholders, where we're really trying to make a positive impact for those people, but it tends to be really broad, and it tends to be very large social issues or environmental issues like broad climate change. And really, when we talk about social impact investment, it's this contribute towards solutions, where really we're having an additional impact that is having deep focus on disadvantaged and vulnerable groups. And as you think about your career and really where you want to focus, there's not any right or wrong along that spectrum, but it does differ a little bit in terms of actually what the focus is, the experience, the skills, what you would do on a day-to-day basis. So just really briefly about Big Society Capital. So we're hosting this event, but really we are here to unite capital expertise and ideas for better lives. And as part of that, it's actually, we believe that we are a systems change agent to support more capital to flow to impact, which is why we're able to host these sorts of events, to be able to support talent and people interested to come and actually direct more capital towards impactful areas. And so we were set up in 2012. It's our 10th anniversary this year. It's very exciting. And we invest into fund managers who in turn invest into charities and social enterprises, as well as doing a lot of engagement work with different financial actors, as well as charities and social enterprises and government as well. And this is really a slide that just gives a snapshot that the number of organisations have really developed over the past 10, 15, 20 years in the social impact investment space, and it's growing year on year, which again is a really great opportunity for people thinking about moving into this space for a career and a role within that. And I'm not going to go into any detail for this, it's just to give an illustration that it's growing exponentially, although this gives a little bit of like a dip, which is not intentional. But what's really important is that we talk about those fund managers and the different organisations providing investment. But what's really key is that the organisations receiving investment are more important in many ways, because they're the ones that are having the impact for people and planet and really making a difference to people's lives. And these are just a few of the different organisations that have been supported by social impact investment. And there's such a breadth of organisations, all the way through from tech platforms that are helping education for more disadvantaged young people, through to community assets of trying to buy a community pub which brings together local people in disadvantaged areas, through to building homes like the example that I used earlier. And so there's that breadth as well in terms of the different issue areas and types of organisations and stage of organisation that social impact investment can support. And so that's a really quick whistle stop tour of impact investment. There is a whole range of different resources that are available about impact investment and social impact investment. And the two places that I would recommend that you go if you want to find out more is the Impact Investment Institute's Learning Hub, which has got a whole range of different resources for people who are looking to move into the space, as well as Good Finance, which has got some really excellent resources, principally targeted charities and social enterprises, but I believe are universally super helpful. So that was quick, but hopefully that's useful to go elsewhere. So for career and social impact investment, I thought I would start with my story. So you'll hear from the panelists afterwards what their story is, but I think that mine's often it's interesting to reflect on because I didn't come from a traditional impact investment background. So I think that I've always been really motivated to have a difference in the world and to be very purposeful in what I do and spend my time on. And because I grew up in quite a disadvantaged area in the Northwest. And yet when I went to university, I started getting really into spies, to be very honest. I really thought I wanted to go and work for like MO5 or like the Department of Defense and do like defense policy. And so I ended up doing a master's in intelligence and international security. It sounds far cooler than it actually was. But I ended up working for a charity that helped victims of conflict and terrorism, which is when I actually started looking at social outcome contracts. And it was by fluke, really, that they were having a real funding challenge. I'd never heard of social outcome contracts. It was around the time that the first one, the Peterborough SIB, was being launched. And it really got my interest because I'd never really heard of investment before. It wasn't something that we ever talked about in careers fairs. It was more common that you would be going down a technical route in the types of school that I was in. And I ended up going into the civil service on their graduate program, and I had a really breadth of opportunity, which was amazing. And I started working a little bit on green finance when I was in the Department for Energy and Climate Change, which really got me thinking about investment and the role of capital to make a difference and being able to shift huge amounts. And then I went into, again by fluke, on secondment to a charity that was trying to set up a £40 million real estate fund that BSc was considering investing into, which is then when I made the move over to BSc. And I joined BSc without really any firm investment experience. I felt very out of my depth, to be very honest. And I've learned a huge amount in the past 7 years that I've been with Big Society Capital. But it's often a question we get asked is, do I need lots and lots of investment experience? It will completely depend on the type of organization that you go into. But we often talk about being trilingual in social impact investment because we need to speak to the financial sector, the social sector, and the public sector. And the nature of role that you want is really about the transferable skills that can really support across those three different areas. And I think for me, even though I've had this meandering journey from doing spies all the way to impact investment, I've always volunteered in different roles, and you can see some of the different logos of places I've done. So one of the things we'll come on to later is that it can be tricky at times to make that transition, especially if you've been in a non-socially motivated organisation. But it's often about how you're demonstrating your purpose and actually what's that thread through time of how you've used your time and been able to engage with some of those broad issues in the world, whether that is environmental or social. A little bit about me, and I'm sure you'll hear from the panelists later. There's a whole range of different career options in social impact investment. The obvious one is always, okay, I'm going to be an investor. And we've done quite a few of these events in the past, and it's been interesting the number of times that I've received the feedback being like, I came in thinking I wanted to be an investor, but actually I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to actually do something else. And so the investors are often a diverse group. There's a whole breadth of actually what they're trying to do and different types of investments and different types of organizations, as I've mentioned. But there's also advisors and consultants working on discrete projects. They are advising either charities, social enterprises, investors, they're part of government, thought leaders. It might be they're doing research and impact investment. And then it's really supporting it, which is really growing in the context of that growing impact investment market, is the infrastructure development around things like government roles. So we've got the Inclusive Economy Unit in DCMS, which really supports impact investment, or like the Impact Investment Institute, or thought leadership organisations, or like standard certificate organisations that are developing qualifications like the CFA UK at the minute. But even within all of this impact investment, one of the things that I always encourage people to think about is Are you interested in working in a social purpose organisation? Because it could be a social enterprise. It might not be about impact investment. It could be that you just want to employ your skills in a more enterprising way. And again, there's a number of people who've come out of these events being like, I didn't actually want to do investment. I want to go work for a social enterprise. So do keep your mind open to that as a possibility as you explore. So there's a whole range of different social impact investors, and this is, I'm not going to go through this in any detail, it's just really to give a snapshot, but there's a real breakdown in actually the types of investors, and it's all the way through to those more philanthropic investors that can actually make investments which are on the spectrum further towards being more philanthropic than towards the more finance side. It might be individual investors who are really focused on a specific area, or institutional investors like a CBRE that's developing really large scale housing funds for affordable and social housing. Or they could be more boutique or focused fund managers. So like Bridges Fund Management's been around since 2002, or Big Issue Invest that's also got a long history where they do lending or more equity investments. Or it could be the social banks where they're taking deposits and lending. So there's such a breadth of organisation to be able to explore rather than necessarily one form that is suitable. And similarly, there's a huge number of advisors and consultants all the way through from those social enterprise capacity like Unlimited, or the funding side that are really arranging investments, or supporting public sector, or investment advisors who are actually advising people to be able to channel their capital. So again, this is not to be exhaustive. Some of the places that I mentioned earlier are a good place to get lists of these, like Good Finance, for example, is a great starting point. But it's just really to show that breadth, which comes to really the type of role that's right for you, because it's really tricky being able to make that decision, as I'm sure many of you have experienced already, like what do you want to do? And I often say to people that if you've got no idea and you really need to find your way, I always recommend, there's a book called like Designing Your Life, which came out of Stanford, or there's like a program, or there's like an Ikigai book as well, which really tries to help you find your like guiding star and what's important to you. And I think some of that is really trying to work out what makes you tick, and what are the things that you enjoy most, and what are the things that you don't like as much, which you can try and avoid, but obviously you always can't. And some of the questions here are often the ones that have come up when talking to people about careers in impact investment, all the way through from like how close to the impact you want to be. When we sit in Big Society Capital, we're quite removed from it, because we invest into a fund manager that invests into a charity social enterprise that then supports beneficiaries. It can be quite difficult to feel the tangible impact of that. It could be that you want to work in a global context rather than like a UK context as we do. Or it might be that you want to influence government decision makers rather than making the investments. It could be that you want to focus on like health or a specific issue, or it could be you just want to be a generalist. I'm much more of a generalist in my preferences, for example. And it might also be you have a preference along that spectrum of capital, depending upon your own experience or actually the way that you think about the world, because this is very subjective in terms of how people think about impact. So these are just some of the things to think about. Again, there's no right or wrong, and there's lots of different ways to think about it, but these are some of the most common ones. And then it's sort of, if you've gotten this far, you've decided that you're going to go into social impact investment, this is a thing that you want to do. Like, what is it that how you get into for a role? And some of these are based on the experience of both mine and colleagues, both internal to Big Society Capital, but also elsewhere, around top tips. And it's not to say that all the usual recruitment good practices don't apply, and it's not exhaustive, but I think some of the things that often come up is that we really need to be able to see your social drive. So in the way that I described earlier, all of those different volunteering roles, or having some sort of thread in terms of what matters to me, it's being able to clearly demonstrate that in a tangible way, because it's very difficult to if you hear somebody say, I'm really passionate about this, and it's kind of, well, show me, and they can't, it's really difficult when there's so many candidates who are able to show that. And it doesn't mean that you need to quit your job and go and work for with frontline beneficiaries or people in need straight away. There's lots of different ways to engage. Like in the UK, there's a huge need for charity trustees to be able to bring expertise to different boards, for example. One of the things that is good to think about as well is be prepared to speak about your favourite investments or enterprise. I know it might seem quite basic, but the number of times that I ask people, like, tell me about your favourite social investment or enterprise, even though they say I'm super passionate about this area and they're not able to, it can really undermine actually that commitment and the passion. So it's like sort of do your homework, but it'll actually help you think better, because these recruitment processes are also meant to be beneficial to you. So why you care about the social issues. So no one's expecting you to be an expert, but it's really about being ready to talk about some key trends and show that you are really interested in it. Showing empathy. So it's about having an appreciation for multiple stakeholders, and that's really key for when we're working with vulnerable people. And it's about articulating transferable skills. So there's very few people who have got a long-standing career in impact investment because it is a growing market. So we expect that transfer in skills, and it's about how you think about demonstrating that against any job description. So these are just some of the places to look for in roles. So organization's own website, Impact Finance Pro is a new platform that's set up to advertise jobs. Global Impact Investment Network has got a huge careers board. And then there's other places like Guardian Jobs or Escape the City. And so this is the most important and interesting part, as we're going to hand over to our panel. And when they cover 3 different questions. So really, who are you? And what does a typical day look like? So they'll just introduce themselves and their organizations. And then we're going to go into a little bit about how they got into social impact investment and top tips for people thinking about their career. So I'm just going to stop sharing if it lets me, so we can see our panelists. So first of all, I'm gonna hand over to Surabhi, because you're the first on my screen, just to give a couple of minutes on who you are and what a typical day looks like.
Yeah, well, thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. So yeah, my name is Surabhi, and for the past 2 years, I was working as an investment analyst at an organization called Nesta on their Arts and Culture Impact Fund, which is a fund that offers loan financing to arts and culture and heritage organizations across the UK that can demonstrate a clear social mission. So what did a typical day look like? So my role as an analyst involved basically speaking to organizations every day who were looking for funding, understanding their financing needs, understanding if they fit our fund's eligibility criteria. So for example, our fund could only make investments in arts and culture organizations and based in the UK. And then, if appropriate, guiding them through a process called due diligence. And the due diligence, I always find, is a little bit like playing detective. So you're basically trying to find out as much as you can about the organization in order to work out if social investment is right for them. So you mainly look at 3 areas, which is financials, social impact, and team capacity and governance. And it's often a process that can take anywhere between a month to 6 months. It often depends on how much capacity the organization has to engage with the process. But what you're trying to determine is the loan affordable for them? Does their rationale for taking on the financing make sense? Is it going to help them achieve their strategic plans? What are the key financial risks around loan repayment? What are the potential social impact returns? And can you get comfortable with the management team and the board's ability to deliver on their goals, both their financial and their social impact goals? What we try to do with the fund is strike a balance between financial and social impact returns and risks. What this means is we can potentially invest in organizations that present with high financial risks if they also present the opportunity to create really strong social impact. And then after weighing up the financial and social impact returns and risks, if I felt there was a strong case for making the investment, I would write a detailed investment application and present it before our investment committee, which would meet once every quarter. If the investment was approved by the committee, then there'd be a period of sort of negotiating and finalizing the legal agreements around the loan. Once agreements were signed off, the loan was drawn, then you entered what was called the portfolio management phase, where you basically check in with the organization every quarter, see how they were doing, see if they needed any additional support, and so forth. So that's sort of basically the journey of what what it looked like from the beginning to the end of an organization. Just one final thing I'd want to point out here is that only about 10% of the organizations who approached us for financing made it into the portfolio. So a large part of the job was also learning how to say no, which is never easy, how to provide constructive feedback to organizations and explain really clearly why you think social investment is not right for them. Happy to answer questions later.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Surabhi. Rahul, I'll pass over to you next.
Sure. So thank you very much, Rebecca, for the earlier introduction and presentation. So my name is Rahul, and I'm a portfolio analyst at Social and Sustainable Capital. So we are a fund who specialize in lending to charities with the goal of strengthening the impact generated by the work of these organizations. So through our flagship fund, we help charities purchase residential properties throughout the UK, which are then used to house individuals being supported by these charities. We see ourselves as a source of flexible capital for these organizations, as they otherwise tend to face quite a few issues receiving similar types of funding from alternative sources such as high street banks and other financial institutions due to the increased risk of lending to charities. So I joined SASC around a year ago after having graduated from my master's in international business, which I did after studying chemistry at undergraduate level. I'll elaborate more on exactly how I found my role later on. However, in terms of what a typical day looks like for me, I mainly engage in carrying out typical loan management functions, such as checking for any repayments which are expected to come in from any of our borrowers, as well as scheduling and arranging for any money which needs to be sent out to our charities. Aside from these core functions, I also participate in a variety of ongoing projects, such as fulfilling of investor due diligence, which we receive as part of our fundraising efforts, as well as updating financial models, which we use to track and assess the performance of our investments in real time. I also maintain working relationships with our borrowers through frequent catch-up calls, as well as assisting in the preparation of materials for our monthly investment committee meetings, as well as investor quarterly reporting. Overall, there are quite a few functions which we cover collectively as a team. However, as an organization, one thing I really like is how closely we work with our borrowers by structuring the terms of our agreements based largely on ensuring funds from our investors are put to the best use and address areas of greatest needs within our borrower organizations. We also try to remain flexible in continuously making adjustments to our agreements in response to current events such as continuously changing local property markets, which we saw change quite a lot due to COVID, as well as now facing other global issues such as the conflict in Ukraine, as well as inflation and rising cost of living. As a team, we've been on a number of borrower site visits where we've had the chance to meet some of the tenants staying in the properties which we help these charities acquire. And through this, I do feel that tangible sense of impact in seeing how our work helps to improve the situation of the beneficiaries being supported by the charities, and which come in a variety of all forms. So as Rebecca mentioned earlier, it could be refugees, rough sleepers, victims of domestic abuse, and so on.
Great. Thank you so much, Rahul, for that wonderful overview. And Victoria, finally, can you give what does a typical day look like for you at Big Sides Capital?
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. So yeah, hi everybody. I'm Victoria. I'm an investment manager at BSC. And I guess my background is I have some experience both looking at debt products and equity products. You may not be able to place my accent, but I like to claim I'm from South Africa. I was actually born in Zimbabwe though. And so after moving down south, I went on to study business finance, accounting, and a minor in economics at the University of Cape Town. So perhaps a little bit more of the typical route into kind of investing, let's say, and then into social impact investing, which I'll come on to. So my typical day at BSC is really very many of the things that Rahul and Surabhi have covered. Perhaps as a sort of breakdown, maybe I spend about 30% of my time between calls and meetings, collaborating with internal and external teams on the various projects. So big part of the job is that sort of communication, collaboration. And another kind of third of my time, let's say, is spent responding to emails, requests for information, carrying out the analysis. We kind of call it maker time at BSC, but really diving into some very colorful spreadsheets and running different scenario analysis to as Surabhi mentioned, look at different risk within projects, doing some market research as well, so getting hold of any other available data that may be out there to benchmark and keep up just with the kind of current affairs as well, I guess, that's relevant in a wider context to what we do. And then also, spend a bit of time writing memos, again, for an investment committee to make decisions on. But also at BSC, there's a focus on learning and development and sharing our experience and learnings. And so that may be in the form of a short paper or even a PowerPoint. Or even a blog. So very much, some time spent writing sort of those formal learnings and sharing. And I also sit on some of our debt fund board seats, or have observer seats on the boards. And so they would be looking at some of the committee papers that come out, and kind of keeping up with the performance of those debt funds. And then, maybe a small slither of time spent around the water cooler chat or over impromptu lunch breaks with colleagues, or going for a walk around the block. And sometimes those are the conversations that kind of really spark the magic and ideas. That's my kind of average breakdown.
Great, thank you so much, Victoria. And so we're going to move on to the next section, which I'm going to ask again each of our panelists just to give a little bit around how they got into social impact investment and their top tips for people who are exploring the space. So I will do it in the same order. So Surabhi, go for it. A few minutes on those, please.
Yep, sure. So in terms of education, so I was born and raised in India. I did a bachelor's in commerce and then an MBA, and then basically spent the next 10 years in the financial services sector, but sort of more on the trading side of things. So I used to be a futures broker, which doesn't mean anything to most people, and that's absolutely fine. But it basically means I used to trade interest rate futures, government bonds, etc., on behalf of clients who were mainly sort of hedge funds and investment banks. So very, very different world. I quit in 2017, hoping to change careers and find something a bit more meaningful and purposeful to do. And I came across, very fortunately, a program called On Purpose, which maybe some of you have heard of. So it's a brilliant program. It's a year-long program that helps the mid-career professionals like me who are trying to transition into the social impact space. And the main way they do that is they help us find 2 6-month work placements with social enterprises. And both of my placements were with social investment organizations. So the first one was the Charity Bank, which is a bank that lends to charities. That's what it says on the tin. The second one was with Big Society Capital. And while I was at Big Society Capital, one of the first impact investment deals that I worked on was the Nesta Arts and Culture Impact Fund, which BSC was deciding whether they wanted to invest in at that time. So once my on-purpose placement at Big Society came to an end, I ended up joining Nesta as an analyst on that fund. And I was there for 2 years. And it was amazing. And I've just very recently change jobs again and joined an organization called Opportunity International, EduFinance. So it's a non-profit that looks at expanding access to affordable education in low-income countries across Asia, Africa, Latin America. So it is quite a bit different from my role at Nesta, and I'm happy to speak about it more if people are interested. But yeah, that's sort of been my slightly twisty, early journey into social impact investment.
Great, thanks, Surabhi. And what's your top tip for people who are looking to move into this space?
Yeah, yes, I did think about this. So I think number one, I would say never underestimate the power of networking. Even if you're like me and it doesn't come naturally to you and you feel really awkward doing it. But if there are organizations that you find interesting, look for people who work there on LinkedIn, reach out to them, ask them if they'd be up for a quick chat or a coffee. It's just a great way to scope out the sector, find out what everyone is up to, and most importantly, who might be hiring in the future. The second tip I would give is don't worry if you don't have any specific past experience in either investment or in social impact. So even though I worked in financial services, I've never worked in an investment role, and that's absolutely fine. People come into the space with all sorts of different experiences. And nothing that we do is really difficult. You can pick up basically everything that you need to know really quickly. All you need is, I think, a healthy level of curiosity, because it's all about playing detective, remember. I think some empathy and some patience really helps, because a lot of organizations, especially in the social sector, can be really small and under-resourced, and really stretched capacity-wise. They may not have any experience taking on investment in the past. They might be really early on in their journey. So it really helps to be just really patient and empathetic when working with them and helping them to make the right decision. And that decision might well be to not take on social investment at all.
Great, thank you so much, Surabhi. Rahul, can I turn to you to give your brief how you got into social impact investment, which you touched on a little bit earlier, and what your one top tip is for people who want to move into this space?
Sure. So whilst in school, I was engaged in a variety of volunteering activities. So through this, had quite a lot of exposure working with social organizations and charities, which I actually ended up really liking, really enjoying. I found that in my experience, it didn't really matter in what capacity I was helping out in, whether it was preparing food for a feeding service or collecting leftover bread at bakeries to bring back to a food bank, or marshalling marathons to raise awareness for human trafficking. Didn't matter how, I always left with a good feeling that I had done something to help those less fortunate, and through this developed quite a strong interest in social issues. At the same time, I also have a strong interest and affinity towards finance, economics, business, which again was also developed in school. So therefore felt that social impact investing was actually the perfect blend of these two areas. And as a result, right now I feel pretty fortunate to be a part of my current organization, as I am able to derive that same feeling of helping others whilst doing so through the use of financial tools and instruments, being a part of a fund that has monthly investment committee meetings, working to structure agreements, ensuring that these deals generate appropriate returns as per our models. So overall, a really good exposure and balance between both social issues and finance. In terms of my top tip, I would give, similar to Surabhi, I would say also don't underestimate the potential of networking. Actually, my current role, I found because a recruiter reached out to me through LinkedIn. So also, making sure that you list out all your experience and all your interests on your LinkedIn profile, so that you can be contacted by similar sort of recruiters, and also, again, not being afraid to reach out.
Great, thanks so much, Rahul. And Victoria, finally over to you for your quick what happened after you'd finished university, which is where we got to earlier, and your one top tip.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So after my wonderful 4 years at the University of Cape Town, why I didn't try and have longer there, I still question, but it was a great place to be a student. I landed a graduate job at an investment bank based in their Johannesburg offices. And so very much a commercial finance aspect and background. And yeah, after 3 years there, I guess was very fortunate to have a sort of unofficial mentor at the time who could see the kind of skills and strengths of mine within the world of finance, but could also see the fact that I wasn't very happy. I think the sort of reputation of investment banking lifestyles is probably well known, and yeah, kind of lack of life really, as well as a sort of overall value misalignment, which reflecting back on now is interesting how when you're kind of within a space you don't necessarily see those things, but looking back it can become clearer. And so, yeah, my mentor encouraged me to apply for a role at the Soros Economic Development Fund that was recruiting at the time. This was also based in Johannesburg. It's a global impact investing fund backed by the philanthropist George Soros. And so, yeah, I got the job based more on the strength of my financial experience at the time. And so less of the kind of impact knowledge, and that was my introduction. And from there, Soros led me to another impact fund called AgDevco. AgDevco, as the name suggests, is an agriculture development company, so also focused on investing across Africa. But this time I was basing myself out of their London office, actually just up the road from BSC's offices. And about 8 months ago now, almost in a sort of reverse opposite change to Surabhi, made the move over to BSC for a few different reasons, but really the heart of which is to be looking at impact more locally rather than from a sort of emerging and development market context, which has been my experience up until joining BSC. So yeah, that's my journey.
Thanks, Victoria. What's your one top tip before we move on to questions?
Sure. So I think you've also mentioned the top tip I had thought of, Rebecca, which is really around, even though I have a background in finance, I think it's really important that it's a world that is the better for a wide and diverse range of people and backgrounds, and actually some of the best and most influential and successful leaders I've come across in the social investment space have backgrounds in policy and agriculture and construction and law, and so and chemistry. So it's really that the finance is kind of the easy part, and maybe I'm saying that because it's what I've known the longest, but I do really believe that it's all the other things that come around social impact investing that's actually more challenging sometimes than the kind of bottom line at the end of the day. So yeah, don't bring your whole self, I guess, to impact investing, because it requires kind of new thinking, new models to be tested, debunk some of the finance 101 theories in some cases, and so yeah, the wider your experience and background, actually the better and more valuable you can be to the space.
Great, thanks so much, Victoria. And I think that to reflect in all three of our panelists' experiences, there's that breadth there. And I think increasingly there are roles at different levels in terms of level of experience that you have as well. We've got 15 minutes for questions. So could I ask that you try and focus any questions that you have on careers and impact investment? I know there's a huge amount of questions that you could ask about impact investment more broadly, but given that we're trying to focus on that career aspect, I'd ask that you just try and ask questions in that spirit. So could I ask you to put any questions that you have for our panelists, either in the chat or raise your hand, and I will navigate the questions.